account kind, storage v2, storage version 2, provisioning state succeeded, created. This is the timestamp. This is when the storage account got created out here. Now this is the catch. Now I now want to go ahead and start transferring the data from my system into the storage account service that I do have. This is where I'm now getting into, because a storage account, let's say, solves the main purpose of holding the data. So I have, let's say, some data. Let's say I have some images to begin with. I want to transfer all these images into the storage account. Can I directly do it? No. You need one more service to be created inside a storage account, which is called as a container. So now this is what I have. I have a tenant, I have a subscription, I have a resource group, I have all the permissions that I need. I also have a storage account service that I created, and this is now a one-to-one relationship with each other. And as and when I create a storage account service, I need to create one more thing inside the storage account called container. And I then can go ahead and now store my data. So how do I create a container? Coming back to the storage account, you have something called data storage options, and you have multiple services for data storage. We'll explore each and everything. There's something called containers, file shares, queues, and tables. I'll go into containers and I'll say add a container. By default, you'll get something called as a logs container. Also look at that. I'll say add a container, and it's going to ask me two things. One is called the name of a container. The other is called the public access level of a container. Very important. We'll talk about what this is. I'll say it's a test container to begin with. The name of the container is a test container, and I'll say, let's say test container -1. Let's say test container 1, first container out here, and I will leave this the way it is. I'll say this is private in brackets, no anonymous access. Will look at what does this, and I'll say create this out. So I've now created something called as a test container. Test container is successfully created. That's the message that I have. Let's go inside the test container, and here you have the option to upload all your data. So I'll say upload. It says select a file or a file. I'll select this file. I'll go into, let's say, a couple of, let's say, folders inside it. Let's see this one, and let's go into something called some data, some sample out here. So I have a couple of images. I can select everything. So I'm using a shift key to select all these things. I can select all these things at one go or one thing at a go, not a problem. I'll say open, and I'll say upload this out. Now it's taking all the data. It's now uploading each and every data out here, and each and everything that I'm now calling, it's now called as a blob. It's called as a blob. There are three types of blobs that you can have. One is called as a blob, very commonly used type. The other is called as a page blob. The third one is called as an append blob. The types of data, we'll also look at that. So you have something called blob, which we are dealing with right now. One of the most common type of data, any data that you upload will go ahead and set by default in something called as a block. Then there is something called append. Now what do you mean by append is that now in your Azure portal, you just don't create a storage account. You later probably create something like a web application service, which will go ahead and write a lot of data. So you can have a web application service, and that particular web application can also write logs, log information. In order to store those logs, you also need a storage account. You need to store it somewhere. All those logs will be stored in the storage account in the form of an append blob. So the nature of the data is an append blob, so that you can identify what is a log information, what is your personal information out here. And there is something called as a page blob. Page blob typically comes when you use a virtual machine service. When you're using something called as a virtual machine service, we'll be looking at in a later class. When a virtual machine stores its data, it will store it in the form of a page blob. Again, I'm just giving you an overview of what is append in a page blob. Once we get into the actual section, I can also come back and tell you, okay, fine, this is the append blob, this is the page blob. Now the main focus is on the blob out here. So whatever I uploaded, It's sitting in something what? Blob. And do you see what is the access tier of all these things? Hot in the bracket what? Inferred. What do you mean by inferred out here is that Microsoft is telling me that when you created a storage account, you said it is hot. So I'll store all the data by default in hot. So inferred is another word for default, or by default, I'll go ahead and store it in hot out here. So I've uploaded all this data. Now what can I do with that? Let's see. There is something called available and all that stuff. Let's come back. I'll click on one of the blobs called sample1.jpg. Sorry, you cannot, you can change it to cool. You can change it hot to cool. Yes, you can do that. Yes, I'll also show that. So if you click on this one, do you see change tier? You can change a particular tier. Again, we'll do a demo on what is hot, what is cool. And you have one more thing called archive. What is that archive? How do you change it and etc. We'll also look at that. But you can change it. You can change it. You can just click on and change it. It'll automatically take hot because while you were creating a storage account, you told it is hot. If you would have created it in cool, all the data would be in cool inferred. All right, so I'll just click on this data. Let's see how can I access this data. Meaning, let's say you put all the data out here. Now, let's say you have one more of your employee who wants to look at this data, who wants to understand this data. Let's say he's sitting in a different region than you are. He's in a different time zone. Let's say you are in US, that guy is in Europe. You want to share this particular data with him. What Microsoft gives you as an option is that when you click on the data, so if I go into the container, I have all this data, and if I click on one particular blob out here, there is something called a URL, unique resource link. If I copy this and I'll just paste it here into the notepad, let's understand how the URL looks like. First thing it is telling, it is HTTPS, meaning hypertext transfer protocol, secure protocol mechanism accessible over the internet, meaning this is like a link. If you go to google.com will say https google.com and etc. So this link is accessible over the internet. And what is this, guys? The storage account name that we created dot what? Blob containers, the service that we are creating dot what? Core.windows.net. This is called as a fully qualified domain name of your storage account, FQDN. We call them as a fully qualified domain name, meaning just like you have google.com, the .com is a domain name out here. In my case, I have what? blob.core.windows.net / what? Test container 1, the name of the container, / what? The name of the blob that we created. And if I copy this out, I can also give this link to people online so that you can click on this one. And if I go here into the URL, into the browser, this is the error that I get. Exactly, private. Someone said private. The blob that you created is sitting in an access tier called private, meaning no one can just take your URL and access it out. You cannot do that. Your data is encrypted. That's what I'm coming down to. Meaning when we created the storage account, it's telling there is something called encryption. What really happens is that whenever you create a storage account, whenever you store the blob inside a storage account, Microsoft will lock it out so that the blob is secured. The blob is the blob is, let's say, protected. So what it does is that it will encrypt it. And if I just go ahead and access it, I cannot bypass the encryption. There is something called decryption that happens in the background. There is two words: encryption, decryption, lock, unlock. In a very, let's say, simple term, in a very, let's say, layman term, lock and unlock out here. So I'll have to have something called as a key to this particular storage account to unlock it. How do I generate it? So if I come back, there is something called generate SAS, shared access signature. Very, very important, meaning just generate a key out here. And if I come here, say generate SAS, there are multiple options out here telling account key, what is the key you need and all that stuff. And I can also tell the key that I generate, how many hours it is valid for. I can say this is valid for 8 hours and etc. Just scroll down and I'll say generate SAS and the URL. Now do you see there is something called blob SAS URL? If I copy this out, if I go back and if I paste it out here, now I get a huge link. Now this link is same until here. If you see this, both of them are same until here. Same thing FQD and the container name, this blob name and etc. But later I got one more thing called SP permissions is read. Someone can read this. Then the start time, ST start time, the end time, and then I have something called as a key. This key is important for me to unlock the encryption or to decrypt my data because the data is in a logged form. Now if I share this link with someone, and again I'll only share this link with people whom I know, with people whom I really want to share. This link is an unsecured link. Anyone can have access to this, but this link, not everyone can have access to it. Only people who I desire can have access to this one. This copy, it's out. Now I'm able to get the data. Now the data is being transmitted over the internet. So now someone can go and download this data, analyze this data, do a couple of things out here in this particular data as such. This is how you share the data with someone by using something called SAS keys, called shared access signature keys. Now there are certain scenarios where you don't want the data to be shared using SAS, where you just want, let's say, someone to just directly go and access your data. For example, uh, did you all do you all use bikes and etc.? Do you pay challans on Telangana portal, the online traffic portal? You pay challans. When you look at challan, it's nothing but a storage account which is holding all the images. That's it. You don't have to enter anything. You just have to enter your bike number and you'll get all that particular photos. You don't have to give a key. You'll just look at the data, right? All those containers are sitting in an access level called, yes, public, but you can ideally call this as blob or container. Anything works in the same way. For example, if I put it as a container, do you see what it's telling? Anonymous read access for blob containers or containers and the blob out here. I'll say okay. And if I go inside it right now, and if I take the URL, I'm not giving any key, nothing, able to access the data. Not only this, let's say I have sample 2, able to access the data. So this is like for portals which are open and which want to give you the images. Like let's say your traffic challans and all these things. This can be, let's say, placed in something called containers because you don't want everyone or don't want to share the key for your storage account and let people access out here. Again, can I change the container from one access level to the other? Yes. How did I change it? If I click on this, there is something called access level and I'll say change to either private, blob or a container level. Again, yes, I'm coming down to that. What is blob? It's telling read access only for blobs, meaning you can read the only the data inside all these things out. You can just go and read the data. But when I put it as container, what really happens out here is that there is something called metadata of a container, meaning information of a container. Like what are the properties of this container? What is the name of the container? What is the URL? What is the last modified date? If you give a container level access, someone with a container level access can look at all these things, last modified date and all that stuff. But if you change it to blob, they cannot read all the data of the container as such. That is what storage account, or that is what, let's say, the blob and the container differ out here. Yes, any questions still here? Anyone, any questions still here?
Hi, Kiran. I
Uh,
mean, when
Sorry,
you're giving container level,
just a second. Can you give me one quick second? I was just taking a question offline. I'll come back to you once I cover that out. Yes. Okay. Okay, reader. You have a storage account and you gave a person called reader. Okay. Okay. Hmm. Okay. Okay. Yes, you can do that. You can also do that. You, in that case, you need to give a specific access. You only need to give, let's say, you have to change the role. You have to change the role out here. You have to change the role of a particular person. Mhm. The document was only downloadable, not readable. Okay. Sample one. Okay. No, if you just scroll down, so now this is only readable. This let's say only readable. You can only download it from here. But if you give this URL, it also becomes readable. Here from here you cannot read it. For example, if I say edit, it will allow me to read it, or it will allow me to look at it from the portal. But if you share this URL, it will generally allow you to, let's say, read it from the internet. If it's an MP4 file, the browser doesn't directly support an MP4 file. If you give this link to someone, it'll just download it out into your local machine, and then you can go ahead and, let's say, look at your MP4 files and etc. PDF files also, yes. Again, if your browser, some of the browsers come with PDF extension. If you look at that, your browser can also read PDF files out there. So if you give this URL for a PDF file, if the browser supports, you can read it, or it'll just download it out. I don't really have a PDF file right now, but if I see, if I can show you some PDF files, let's see. If I have a PDF file here, again, I don't really have a PDF file, but I can create a PDF file and show it to you. Yes. Yes, I'll take some questions online and come back to you. Sorry, whatever it can be is the URL. Sometimes the URL just downloads the file for you. Sometimes you can read it directly from the browser, like I'm doing it here, because it's an image. Browser supports images, so I can read it. I can also do a right click here, say copy image, save image. Yes, I'll just take some questions on the online and come back. Yes, guys, someone on online class has a question.
Yes.
Yeah, hi, Kiran.
Just a second. Sriram, you can go at first since you
Yeah.
had one. I'll come on.
Uh, when you're saying like container level access anonymous, it means like public access or like only some, I mean, like anyone
No, it's a
can.
public access. It's anonymous, meaning anyone can read it.
Okay, blob means objects, right? Objects in the container.
I'm sorry, can you come again with your question?
Blob as in objects inside the container, right? I mean, there are three levels. One is
Blobs are
container.
objects inside the container. Correct.
uh,
Correct.
yeah. I mean, there is one container and then blob and then other one is
Blob.
public, private. Sorry.
Private.
Yeah.
So private, blob, and container. Three things out here.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yes. Any more questions, guys?
Yeah, hello,
Can we
Kiran.
give permissions to only one blob? No. Only one container? Yes. Only one blob? No. Only one container? Access control. You can also go ahead and give something called access control at a container level. This is the last point. If you go inside a blob, you cannot directly do an access here. You cannot directly do an access. Can you do it indirectly? Yes. While generating an SAS, you can say who is the IP address or who is the user allowed from a particular IP address. You can give that. In that case, you will be restricting the access to only one particular person. You can give an IP address of someone and you can restrict, let's say, the remaining people out here from accessing it out here. Yes. What will be Azure admin topics be covered? Again, please go back to the first session. I've covered everything on what is the topics that are covered. Please look at that. And if you have a question there, I can answer those. Can we store images in files? When you say in files, if you are talking about something called file share, this is a different one. This is a different service altogether. We will look at that on what file share is. But you can store generally all your unstructured data inside a container as a blob. Whether it's an image, whether it's a video, whether it's a PDF and everything, you can go ahead and upload all these things or download all these things out here. Yes. Any more
Yeah, hi,
questions?
Kiran. Yeah, any file extension restrictions are there while uploading?
No, no file extension restrictions are there while uploading a file. You can also do a zip file, you can exe files and all these things out. Anything which is a binary data, generally everything is considered to be a binary data. You can go ahead and upload all those things out there.
Okay, okay, thank you.
any expiration for the data that you upload? No. For the URL, if it is in a container, let's say if it's in a container out here, there is no expiration for your URL. You can directly go and access your URLs out there if it's in a container. If it's in a private, and if you want to access it, then it's a different question altogether, because you cannot directly access a private. You cannot do the URL, you cannot go to the URL and say, you know what, I need a private blob and etc. And you cannot access it directly. You will get an error telling that this one. You'll have to generate something called as a shared access signature. So if I go back, there is something called shared access signature out here. If I generate a shared access signature, Microsoft will definitely ask me what is the start and the end time. So shared access signatures will have an expiry. URLs in general doesn't have an expiry. Does that answer your question?
I get it. In the shared access URL, I saw somewhere 2021 in the URL. Can you open the previous shared access URL and
This one.
notepad some? Yeah, yes, somewhere I saw 2021. Yeah, here 2021-06-08.
That's the API version. I mean, that's the API version for internal Microsoft understanding. So that's fine. It's an API version out here.
Okay, okay. I thought that is something.
Okay. Yes. To answer your question once again, there are two things that I'm talking about. One is a URL. And where do you find a URL? Here, this is where you find a URL. URL doesn't expire. URL is the same. But if you want to access your blob over the internet using the URL, it is not possible, because your blob or all your data is in a private access level. To bypass it, you'll have to create what? Shared access signature. Shared access signatures have an expiry. Meaning if I create one, I can tell what is the expiry that I need. I can give a maximum of 1 year expiration out here, and I can give this particular, let's say, shared access URL out here. So the URL that comes along with the blob doesn't expire, but the shared access signatures, they come with an expiration date. Yes, any more questions here, guys? Okay, okay. Just a second, sorry. Yogeshwar, just a second. I was just seeing a question offline. Just come back to you. Again, Microsoft will charge you. Like if you, let's say, look at that particular storage account again, go to your subscription, see how much of credits are deducted. Sorry, can you come in? No, they will charge you. Again, it will take some time for that credit to update. So in my case, if you look at this, when I started, I had somewhere around 10,000 or something. Do you see how many credits I have right now? And if I click on this called credits, it'll also tell me what is my day-to-day consumption. What did I create? What did I, let's say, lose and all that stuff. Yes, it will take some time, 24 to 48 hours to reflect that, telling you that you used it and all. Yes, it will charge. It will get deducted from that 14,000 credits that you are allocated. So that 14,000 credits will, initially get subtracted, and there'll be a day where it'll become zero and your subscription will get disabled. Again, yesterday same question. If you are using your talk time and you cut the call, will your talk time come back? No, right? Same thing. Meaning you recharge your mobile. You spoke with someone for 2 minutes. You got 2 rupees reduction. You cut a call. Will the 2 rupees come back? Same thing here. It's a pay as you go model. So you use it for that. You are deducted for it. If you delete it, future deductions will be stopped. Meaning till this hour, you will get a charge. After this hour, you won't get a charge as such. Yes,
Hi, Kiran.
someone online. Go ahead, please.
Hi, hi, Kiran. Can you please explain blob once again? Blob
Again,
and
yes, blob and container, great. So till storage account, we are good, right? You understood till storage account. So whatever data that I upload inside a storage account, I'm now telling it's a blob, and I need to create a container to hold a blob. So container is nothing but folders inside a storage account that can hold your blobs. Again, how many maximum containers you can create? Unlimited. There is no, let's say, number. until and unless you are not breaching the upper limit of 500 terabyte. Until that, you can go ahead and create any number of containers you need. So inside a container is where you will upload a file, and a file is called as a blob. And we were just talking on how to access a blob. This is what we were really talking about. When it's in a private mode, when it's in a container mode, how do you access it? And what is something called as a shared access signature? Yes, I'll again will again do SAS today. I'm just giving you the overview of SAS. We'll see how do you do a complete control over the SAS and all these things. Yes, any more questions here?
Yeah,
Is
hi Kiran.
Microsoft you go please?
Yeah, related to access type, if we
Okay,
select, for example, we selected hot, right?
correct.
Yeah, I don't access that file for 2 to 3 years, and I try to access that file after 2 to 3 years. It will
Okay.
become cool or hot.
No, it will still be hot. The question here is that I have a file, I put it in hot. I do not access it for 2 to 3 years. After 2 to 3 years, if I come back to my storage account, will it still be in hot? Will it be in cool? It will still be in hot until and unless you don't change it. Until and unless you don't change that particular data to cool.
Okay, then we can save all the files in hot itself, because it is giving less price, right? It is coming under less price, right? So I will save
Mhm.
all the data in this, and I will access after few years, instead of
Okay.
going with cool.
Again, when you look at hot, if you store, let's say, around 100 GB, let's say you stored 100 GB of data in hot, you will still pay 142 rupees per a month. You'd still end up paying this particular cost because the per GB storage, hot is not designed for storage, hot is designed for access. If you just, let's say, in your scenario, when you say it is 2 to 3 years, you should have gone to cool, which will give you 77, half of the cost what hot was giving. So in your scenario, I would suggest go to cool, not hot. So after 2 to 3 years, then if you say that, you know what, my data is being frequently accessed, change it to back to hot, and then so that you can avoid this particular cost, the read and write cost, the read and write cost that gets incurred out there.
Okay, okay, got it.
Getting my point? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, hello, Kiran. Yeah,
Go ahead.
yeah. Credits will be debited depends upon the services we used or data what we stored in the containers. For example, MBs, some credits, GBs, more credits like that are only entire container standard credits.
Like the entire container will be charged depending upon how much, or the entire storage account will be charged depending upon how much of data you're consuming, and also the services. In my case, if you looked at, let's say, my subscription, I've utilized around 1900 rupees out here. I've done a lot of services out here. It's just not storage account. I did a lot of services out here, and this is the cost how Microsoft is calculating for me. So it is per a storage account, meaning it is on a storage account where your service is being charged. AWS, the charge is a little less. When you look at AWS out there, the cost per service when compared to Azure is little less. AWS offers you at a discounted price. Yes. So with that, I'll have to put an end to the session. I'm a little top of the hour, so I'll have one more class right now, so to take. So please go through it. Understand a couple of concepts on what is the access tier, what is hot, what is cool, how do you store a data, and how do you access your data. Now let divide yourselves into groups. First, put your storage account into private. See if your friend is able to access the data through the URL. Change it to, let's say, a container. See if is able to access to the same URL. And in a private mode, how do you generate an SAS? How do you give it to someone? How do they, or how can they access it? These are the couple of things I would love to, or I would, let's say, tell you all to go ahead and, let's say, read out and do a couple of things out here. And tomorrow we'll look at, say, multiple things on what are the different permissions in a SaaS, what are access keys, how do you better, I mean, how do, let's say, access your data in a better way, and all these things. All right, thank you guys, and have a good day ahead.